What if I told you the CIA once tried to control the human mind? For years, the truth stayed buried inside a secret program called MKUltra. In the middle of the Cold War, the CIA was searching for a way to control the human mind. For years, the program stayed hidden behind locked doors and shredded paperwork. This was not science in the open. It was science hidden inside a national security nightmare. While America watched the news, the real story was buried beneath layers of secrecy. Some people involved in these experiments didn't even know they were part of them. The most frightening part was not what the program did in public, but what it did in private. Inside these rooms, the line between research and abuse could disappear completely. Behind the ordinary language of government paperwork was a darker intention. The operation was systematic, bureaucratic, and deeply unethical. And when the operation became too dangerous, the evidence began to disappear. The danger was not only in the lab, it was in the world outside it too. MKUltra was less about discovery and more about intrusion. In the Cold War mindset, information was power and fear was a tool. Not everyone in the system looked ruthless. Some looked uncertain. Even when the records surfaced, the truth was still heavily censored. What made MKUltra so disturbing wasn't chaos. It was organization. But secrets rarely stay buried forever. Then the story moved from rumor into the record. Once the documents came out, America began to understand the scale of it. History survives in boxes, and sometimes in what was never destroyed. One of the most disturbing parts was how ordinary places could be used for extraordinary harm. Some of the darkest questions around MKUltra begin where power meets vulnerability. To the people running it, human beings could become data points. Sometimes the cover-up was as ordinary as a letter. The files were hidden. The story was buried. But the truth kept finding its way back. Long after the experiments ended, the paper trail still had stories to tell. Even the truth that survived was heavily cut apart. Not every secret looks dramatic. Some just walk past you in a hallway. Programs like this depended on ordinary people doing extraordinary things. In secret, the people involved did not always look like villains. That is what made it worse. Piece by piece, the operation became harder to deny. When documents failed, witnesses began filling in the gaps. The hearings turned whispers into testimony. What had once been hidden behind code names was now being asked about in public. In secret programs, the name was often the first layer of disguise. Most of the work happened where nobody was supposed to look. Not everyone in the room understood the full picture. In government work, the first draft of truth often came from a typewriter. The line between medicine and manipulation was often too easy to cross. Sometimes history survives. Not in headlines, but in storage rooms. When the story finally surfaced, it sounded almost too dark to believe. The more they looked, the more questions appeared. Every stamp was a reminder that someone decided what the public would never see. In secret systems, silence was often built into the job. The system looked ordinary from the outside. A covert program does not live only in laboratories. It travels. Once the press started asking the right questions, the silence began to crack. The story was never one moment. It was a pile of moments. Secret programs are built as much on calls as on code names, and behind every closed door. There was another question waiting. The public heard the story late, but once it broke, it was impossible to unhear. Sometimes what matters most is not what you see, but what is no longer there. The story only made sense when the fragments were placed side by side. Most Americans had no idea something so dark was unfolding. In their name, a signature can authorize far more than most people ever realize. The records were not just paper. They were proof of a system that existed. Medicine, when misused, can become one of the most dangerous forms of authority. When people finally spoke, the room itself seemed to change, and sometimes the first instinct was simply to hide everything again. The building itself seemed to know how to keep quiet. The past becomes clearer when the pieces are finally sorted in the right order. History can feel alive again when old footage starts moving. The people inside the system did not leave the system behind when they went home. Great secrets are often managed with very small pieces of paper. Sometimes the breakthrough begins with a mismatch no one expected. Secrecy rarely ends with a bang. It ends with a seal. Some of the darkest chapters in history hide behind the language of care. Even a voice from years ago can still carry weight. The investigation moved wherever the evidence could be carried. Secrecy changed the way people moved through a room. By the time the public saw it, the paper had already traveled a long way. That cold feeling is part of the story too. Major operations are often carried by the smallest routines. Every file invited the same question: reveal it or bury it again. The room emptied. The questions did not. The record survived, but not intact. Sometimes the truth is not hidden in one page. It is hidden in what the pages add up to. The deeper the building, the quieter it seemed to become. Like home for many people, the first reaction was simple disbelief. Some decisions leave the room before the people do. Behind every file was a person, and behind every person was a life interrupted. One source was never enough. The story had to be checked from every angle. Sometimes the weight of secrecy showed up after everyone else had gone home. The most dangerous secrets are often the ones kept efficiently. Eventually, the story reached living rooms where it landed. Like a shockwave, telling the truth publicly is never just a legal act. It is a human one. Most people kept walking because that is what systems count on. The secrecy lasted not for days, but for years. The truth emerged through convergence, not a single dramatic reveal. The questions got bigger than the answers that were already public. Burying truth is often as simple as putting one file under another. Systems like this rarely survive on secrecy alone. They survive on procedure. What matters most is often what the camera never gets to enter. Every clipping was a clue, but the picture only appeared when they all met. A label can look small, but sometimes it carries a voice that changes everything. Truth can be exhausting, even when it is finally allowed to speak. What survived did not survive by accident. It survived because it was stored. Sometimes a historical scandal feels less like the past and more like an alarm. And even now, the files still ask more questions than they answer. Decades later, the people closest to the story still carried it in their voices. Time did not erase the story. It only made it harder to read. The room was quiet again, but the questions stayed in it. Some stories do not end. They simply stop being hidden. The archive makes one thing clear. History is never really finished. Every year markers another door into the same dark history. The work does not stop just because the lights go out. News becomes history in the instant people stop reading and start remembering. At some point, every hidden story asks to be told. Even now, the final drawer still feels incomplete. The system was made of people, and that is what makes it harder to forget. Every closed door is only part of the story. When the pages are sorted, the timeline starts speaking for itself. The last sentence is often the most difficult one to write. For every page that appeared, many more remained out of sight. In a secret system, even silence can be heavy. This is where one part of the story ends and the next one begins. The room is empty, but the record is not. Some stories keep coming back because they were never fully answered. The next voice could belong to anyone willing to look closely enough. The folder closes. The questions do not. The next room is where the story keeps going. The story is not over. It is only being filed for the next part. The rest of the story, he waits.